Hi everyone, and welcome to Core Lecture 14. Today we'll be discussing developing search terms. Before we begin, you will need to grab the following materials for today's lecture assignment. You'll need a document to write on and access to your Project 2 materials. The purpose and goals for today's lecture are as follows. We'll understand brainstorming as a method for search term development. We'll explore methods for conducting well-rounded informed research, and we'll recognize search term development as ongoing in the research process. All right, brainstorming. So when we think about defining the terms that we want to use and identifying the terms that we want to use to find more information about a topic that we're interested in, one of the best places to start is with ourselves. And we can do that, I think, best for search terms, or as it relates to search terms, the best way to do that is brainstorming. Now, the University of Kansas their writing center defines brainstorming as generating a lot of information within a short time by building on association from previous terms you have mentioned. You can also think of it as listing. So basically going from one idea to the next as it comes to your mind while you are thinking about the topic that you're thinking about and the topic that you're writing on. So when we think about brainstorming, it's different from free writing in that with free writing, you're often going to produce full-blown sentences. It's not, required or anything, but more often than not, when you free write, you have a tendency, all writers have a tendency to write incomplete sentences. But with brainstorming, it is a very short list, kind of like a shopping list of different things that you could possibly search to become more knowledgeable on a certain topic or concept. All right, well, how do we brainstorm? What are going to be the steps for brainstorming? So first, you want to begin with the topic you want to write on. That is the most important thing, because if you don't know what you want to write on, then how can you develop search terms for it? You can't. So what you can do to best help you transition from project 2 to project 3. So project 2, you started off fairly broad. So you looked at, some of you are looking at gun control in a broader sense, others abortion, others the cost of education. So you can see how those topics in and of themselves are super broad. We can talk about a lot of stuff on how to understand these topics, how to approach them, how to solve problems that are related to them. So of course you can see, yeah, that's a good starting point, but we can still see how even approaching it in a broad sense like that could still be really overwhelming. I mean, if you were to sit someone down and say, take 2 minutes and brainstorm a list of search terms on gun control. Oh my gosh, there are so many terms that we could develop. There are so many ways that we could approach that topic that we couldn't probably develop a workable list in that short amount of time, which defeats the purpose of brainstorming. So as we transition from project 2 to project 3, from the solution synthesis to the annotated bibliography, what I'd like you to do is start thinking about, if you haven't done so already, where you saw yourself fitting into the discussion and what kind of arguments you were making and how you were responding to some of the solutions or perspectives that you engaged with and included in that synthesis. Now, if you find yourself saying, okay, well, I read all of this, let's say, on the legalization of cannabis or on the federal legalization of cannabis. So if you said, I read a number of perspectives on the issue, I've included at least 3 that propose different solutions for how we should approach cannabis in the United States. So again, cannabis is super broad, but if you find yourself saying after the synthesis, oh, I tend to go with more of the strictly medicinal route, then you know that you don't have to brainstorm terms related to recreational or to prohibition. Rather, you can say, this is the topic I want to write on the legalization perhaps of medicinal cannabis. So even from there, you can see how you can start to narrow down your topic into something that is far more manageable to find sources on. Because again, if you're going to research just cannabis and plug that into the library databases, you are going to be overwhelmed with the amount of sources that you find. But the more you're able to narrow it down, the more specific information you're going to be able to locate. So if you haven't done so already, before you define what that topic is that you want to brainstorm on, think about how you responded to the other solutions or perspectives in your synthesis. Think about how you want to approach the topic and or the problem you've identified, and approach this brainstorming through that lens. Next, what you'll want to do is you want to set a short timer. Much like with free writing, you want to keep an eye on your time. But with free writing, it's usually recommended that you go from 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. But with brainstorm, you want to keep it short because you're not trying to flesh out these ideas. You're trying to say, what kind of words will lead me to the information I'm looking for, or will allow me to locate the information that's going to be helpful for me in my research. Now, after you've set that short timer, it's time to write. You want to jot down any and all words or phrases that come to mind. So again, much like free writing, there should be nothing holding you back. You should, again, think of those associations. So, if I were to say medical cannabis and you were brainstorming on that for search terms, what are going to be some, common words that you think of when you hear the topic medicinal cannabis? Now, after you're done brainstorming for up to 2 minutes, you want to distance yourself from the brainstorm. Go do some other homework. Go hang out with friends or family. Go watch an episode of your favorite show. It really doesn't matter, but don't immediately dive back in. Rather, give yourself the opportunity to distance yourself from that content, and then you can return to it with fresh eyes and with a clear mind for thinking about how you can reasonably use these terms in your search. Now, after you have returned to your brainstorm and you start to revisit it, again, much like with free writing, you want to circle notes or words and phrases that stick out to you. So maybe you find yourself saying, oh, this term here really represents a direction I want to take and a focus I want to make in my annotated bibliography and in my civic engagement argument. So I'm going to circle that, or I'm going to highlight that, or I'm going to make a note to myself that this is a term that I want to search or that I want to pursue in greater detail. So, once you have highlighted the terms you find interesting or have made notes to yourself in some way, shape, or form that these terms will help lead you to information that you want to find, you want to see what items you can combine in a search. Sometimes you'll get in your list a group of individual words that you can put together to create new search terms that perhaps will lead you to more relevant information to your own ongoing research. You also want to find the most broad terms in your search and narrow as you go. So again, you can see something similar to what we're doing with the scaffolding of projects 2, 3, and 4. So we started really broad with the general problem or issue or topic in project 2, and we're narrowing it down a little further in project 3, and finally we're going to have a specific argument in project 4. So we're starting off really broad, and then the more we research, the more we learn, the more narrow we are going to be in our focus. So the same will be true with brainstorming and information gathering. That is why it is a flexible, ongoing process that should be responsive to new information as you come across it. So perhaps you drafted 2 words individually or 2 terms individually. And as you go through and read, you say, hey, actually, these 2 words are treated as a single phrase. So maybe you find yourself saying, okay, well, rather than searching them individually, I'm going to put them together and see what I find. When you format your terms to search in the library databases, you want to format those as fragments or as questions. Those will typically yield the best search results. So, for example, you could say medicinal cannabis and cancer patients. So that's a fragment, right? It doesn't have a subject or a verb. It's just a few terms connected with the word and. Or you could phrase it as a question. What types of cancers are treated with medical cannabis? So you can see there are a couple different ways that you can approach, but with the library databases, you will probably see yourself using the fragment option, so the keywords or phrases, more than you will the questions. But some databases do make room so you can pose those terms as questions. Before we discuss the lecture assignment, I first want to demonstrate what brainstorming a list of search terms might look like. So, referring back to the method and the approach that we discussed earlier, I've done the first step. I have identified my topic, so the federalization of cannabis. So that's what I want all of my terms to circle back to. Also, what I will recommend is that depending on the program that you're using, you probably should have some kind of option to include either bullets or to include numbers of some sort. I would recommend doing so. The reason is it will help you sort of sift through the different ideas that you have. It'll help you combine search terms because you'll know where one thought ends and the other begins. So I would just recommend including some kind of number or bullet point to, again, help you separate the different terms or ideas that you develop. Not required, but certainly helpful. Also, what I have done is I have set my timer here. So for time's sake, I'm going to go 30 seconds, but I do have that ready to go. So I am just going to start the timer off at 30 seconds. And I'm going to try and brainstorm as many possible terms as I can regarding the federalization of cannabis, and that will help me gather more information regarding the federalization of cannabis. So here we go. Okay, so you can definitely tell that that goes by quickly. And so I would definitely recommend doing 1 or 2 minutes because you can see I only came up with 9 terms. 9 terms is something that we can certainly work with, but you can imagine that with 1 or 2 minutes, all the terms that I could have developed if I had given myself a little more time. So, but you can see how when you put yourself under the timer like I just did, you really are pressured to think on the spot. But when you do put that pressure on yourself, you are able to think quickly and you are able to sort of just rapid fire off those search terms as they come to mind. So let's assume then that I have taken like a half hour break from my brainstorming list, right? Because remember, that's something that you'll want to do. It'll kind of give you the opportunity to think about it without really thinking about it, and thinking about the terms. So let's say, let's first identify some that we can combine. So let's say I'll use my highlighting feature here. So I look at states' rights, okay, and 10th Amendment, right? So because maybe during Project 2, I found myself saying, okay, well, there's a really big push to legalize cannabis on the federal level. But what does that mean for some states? What if Nevada wants to approach it differently than California, and California has a different vision for legalization than Arizona, and Arizona might be different from Maine, and Maine from Florida, and so on and so on. So maybe I could find myself saying federalization of cannabis and states' rights, 10th Amendment. And so that'll give me information regarding that specifically. Let's see if there are other ones that we can combine. Okay, let's talk about medical use and cancer, medical uses and cancer uses. So we can see that cancer uses might fall under the umbrella of medical uses, right? So we can combine them to say, okay, medical uses and cancer uses of cannabis or marijuana. And so we can start to see how we can combine these terms. So yeah, we can certainly search each one of these individually and probably find a lot of great information. But if we start tinkering around with which ones can we combine to find even more specific results, that's when you're going to start finding the most relevant research to the argument that you're trying to make later in Project 4. So this is essentially what you want to do when you're brainstorming a list of terms that you can use in a search. So let's return now to the lecture assignment and talk about the specifics of that. So I'd like you to refer back to your Project 2 materials and identify a perspective or a solution you think will shape or influence your directions for Projects 3 and 4. So again, if there was a certain idea or concept or solution or approach that you found yourself gravitating toward, or perhaps agreeing with more in your synthesis, this might indicate a possible direction that you can take for Project 4, and that of course will inform the sources you gather in Project 3. So there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's however you want to approach it. Now, once you have narrowed down that topic from what you explored in a super broad sense in Project 2 to the direction you could see your later works taking in Projects 3 and 4, I'd like you to take 2 minutes and brainstorm terms you could reasonably search in the library databases. So we're going to move beyond Google and we are going to search the library databases. What database you decide to search is entirely up to you. You also want to conduct a search using the library databases of your choice. So remember, this is where we're going to start to engage with more scholarly sources. Now, to fuel your search, use one term as is. So if we were to go back here to this list, maybe I want to talk about the medical uses of cannabis. So that would be my one term on its own. And then what I'd like you to do is combine at least two terms to create a new search term or phrase. So maybe we come back here and we find a way to eloquently combine states' rights and the 10th Amendment regarding the federal legalization of cannabis. Now, compose a brief write-up, so about 50 words, reflecting on the terms you drafted and selected. Now, in your write-up, I'd like you to address the following. I'd like you to talk about the database, or at least name the database you used. Again, that's entirely up to you, whichever one you'd like. I'd also like you to identify the singular term that you used and what you found from that, and then the combined terms you used and what you found. Now, this can be very informal and very brief, so maybe you say, okay, I searched medical uses of cannabis, and I came across 100 results, mostly focused on uh, epilepsy and cancer research. So it doesn't have to be anything super fleshed out. It just has to be, here's what I searched and here's what I saw. So what you will do then is for your weekly homework then, you're going to include your core lecture 14 summary and assignment, and overall you'll want to include your summaries and lecture assignments for core lectures 13 and 14, as well as a mini lecture of your choice, and that is all going to be due to Canvas by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, February 24th. Now, if you have any questions or would like to chat about these concepts further, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via Canvas DM. All right, everyone, until next time.